user friendly, and this is lasers and stuff. This is a new visualizer I'm working on. So yeah, I'm not going to go over this entire patch, how I have this sort of all routed. It's quite a bit here, but it's mostly just MIDI envelopes and envelope followers and things like that inside of this drum rack, and then an LFO or two. So this is a Max for Live jitter device, and it works inside of Ableton, and there's all these different controls here with some MIDI inputs and things like that to sort of change what's happening with the visuals. So you'll need Ableton Live Standard plus Max or Ableton Live 12 Suite. And then as far as Mac or PC, I'll have details about that in the actual post on Patreon where you can download this. This is still a beta version, still kind of tracking down bugs and things like that. The UI may change a little bit, but for the most part, I think it's kind of ready enough for folks to start testing. So yeah, we'll go over the different controls and things like that. This whole session with the visualizer will be available on my Patreon. Okay, so we'll start here on the left side and work to the right. This first big button right here, that's going to turn the visuals on or off. So if you get a black window, make sure that the visuals are actually on. And if you turn them off, you won't see any sort of movement or anything when you adjust these different sliders. Floating is going to mean that the window will either stay on top of Ableton or disappear when you click Ableton. So it'll just kind of go behind the Ableton window until you bring it to the front again. So different reasons you would want to have floating on or off. Full screen is just going to make it full screen or a small window. If you enter full screen, you can exit full screen by hitting escape on your keyboard. The next thing to look at is the spotlights here. So I'm going to zoom out so we can sort of see them all. And you can turn them off. Or turn them on. And depending on whether they're off or on is going to determine what happens with the MIDI. So if they're on and you send it a MIDI note determined by the sort of slider here below it, sending it a MIDI gate is going to turn it off. If you turn it off, sending it a MIDI gate is going to turn it on. That's going to be the case for basically anywhere you see this sort of on-off button with a MIDI note slider. Soft is going to sort of change the shape of the spotlight. It's going to be more apparent with more brightness. So higher brightness, we adjust the soft, you can see what happens. So that's the spotlights. The next thing is the hologram. So zoom back in here. And there's a bunch of different controls here. They're all essentially just going to move the hologram around in different ways. So there's scale, expand, fold. These are good for like LFOs and things like that. Point scale, which is sort of going to change. You can see these spheres in there. It's going to change the size of those spheres. Then there's stretch. So just a bunch of different ways to sort of move this abstract shape around. There's sparks, which is kind of like a little firework explosion. Basically the same shape, but it's offset a little bit. So if we move over to the side, you can see that it doesn't actually come out of the same shape. It comes out of that little point right there. And then we can turn these different elements on or off. Same thing with MIDI, to where you can trigger them on or off. And then lastly up here is this shape slider, which is just going to make pretty extreme changes to the overall shape. Next up is the lasers. So right here you see Las Bloom. And then same thing as the other ones, we can turn them off or on. Same deal with the MIDI note. If they're off, they'll turn on. If they're on, they'll turn off. And their size and spread. So you can see that the spread is like, it looks like there's a lot of dead space in here where nothing's actually happening. If we zoom out, you can see that the spread is basically all the way up to the top, all the way down, through, and then back to the top again. Next up is the color palette here, which it's not really, you don't have control over each individual element. I may change that in the future, but for right now, I didn't want to clog up the UI with too many RGB sliders. So this is how I'm going to do it for now. If you go all the way down here to the black, depending on the other settings, sometimes things will sort of disappear, which makes sense because it's light, but yeah. So that's the color. The next thing is the camera here. This random button will just move the camera to a particular spot or a random spot. Speed is going to determine how quickly that happens. Speed, I would say, is actually more of like a smoothing. And you can trigger this with MIDI, and then there's also a reset button here. Or you can control the camera by hand. Left, right, up, down. And then lastly is this sort of set of master effects. So we have another bloom, which is going to sort of affect everything. And there's blur, brightness, contrast, and saturation. So if you want to get more of like a visualizer rather than a sort of stage looking thing, messing around with a couple of these controls, you can sort of get these blobs of different color. So yeah, then there's a reset button there. Okay, yeah, that's the overview. Like I said, this is available on my Patreon, and thanks for watching. Bye.